The red moon hung over the Arizona desert like a dying ember that refused to fade. The land stretched endless and lonely, painted in the pale light of dust and bone. Coyotes sang in the distance, and the wind carried whispers of old sorrow through the canyons. It was on such a night that a lone rider came down from the ridge, a man who looked as though he had ridden out of hell itself, and didn't much care if he ever went back. His name was Cole Laramie, though few knew it and fewer dared to ask. He had the look of a drifter, tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden beneath the shadow of a worn hat. The horse beneath him was lean and restless, the kind that had seen too many miles and too little mercy. Cole rode with the easy stillness of someone used to silence, the kind of silence that comes after a gunfight, when only the wind and the dead are left to talk. Down in the valley, nestled between stretches of rock and mesquite, sat a small ranch, 2 barns, a corral, and a single flickering light in the window. It wasn't much, but to a man like Cole it looked like heaven. His water was gone, his horse near spent, and his body carried wounds both fresh and buried deep. The ranch belonged to Evelyn Hart, a woman who had seen more heartbreak than most. Her husband Matthew had been killed 2 winters ago when a band of cattle raiders came through the territory. Since then, Evelyn had worked the land alone. The sun had turned her skin a soft bronze, and her eyes, once bright with youth, now carried the dull ache of survival. Each dawn she rose with the roosters, and each dusk she went to bed with her shotgun by the door. That night, as she sat mending a torn saddle strap by lamplight, she heard the distant echo of hooves. Her first thought was danger. Out here, nothing good came riding after dark. She grabbed the shotgun and stepped out onto the porch. The moon painted her hair silver, the wind pulling at her thin night shawl. She saw him then, the stranger, moving slow and steady, a silhouette cut against the glow of the desert sky. Cole stopped a few yards short of the porch. He didn't speak right away, just tipped his hat and looked at her through eyes that seemed carved from smoke and stone. "Ma'am," he said at last, his voice low, roughened by dust and distance, "I don't mean no trouble. Just looking for a place to rest the night." Evelyn studied him. The scars on his cheek caught the moonlight. His clothes were torn, his hands raw. He looked dangerous, but not cruel. There was something in the way he stood, quiet and respectful, that made her lower the barrel of her gun just slightly. "There's an empty stall in the barn," she said finally. "You can stay till morning." He nodded once, grateful but not eager, as if he were used to being turned away. She watched him lead his horse toward the barn. For a long time she stood on that porch, staring into the night, listening to the soft murmur of him tending to his animal. The way he moved, careful, deliberate, reminded her of her husband before the war had hardened him. When she went back inside, she found herself wondering what kind of man still said ma'am in a land where politeness was as dead as the buffalo. At dawn, she found him already awake, hauling water and stacking feed without being asked. The sun had barely touched the mountains, and yet he worked like a man with something to prove. "You don't owe me chores, mister," she said, stepping out with her coffee cup. He looked at her, eyes dark as riverstone. "A man ought to earn his keep," he replied. "Least he can do." She said nothing more, but later, when she saw how gently he brushed her horses, she felt the tightness in her chest loosen just a little. The ranch had been silent too long. His presence, quiet though it was, filled that emptiness in ways she hadn't expected. At supper they shared beans and cornbread in the soft glow of the lamp. He spoke little, mostly yes or no answers, but every word carried the weight of someone who'd learned to measure truth carefully. "You don't look like a man just passing through," she said finally. He smiled faintly, not quite meeting her eyes. "Ain't many places left for a man like me to stop." "And what kind of man is that?" He hesitated, setting down his tin cup. "The kind who's done things he can't pray away." The room went still. Evelyn didn't press further. She knew that tone, knew what it meant to carry ghosts that wouldn't stay buried. Later, when the moon rose again, that same haunting red disk, she found herself awake, staring through the window toward the barn. The wind carried the faint rhythm of his hammer striking wood, mending the stall gate. He hadn't gone to sleep. Something about the steadiness of that sound, methodical, patient, comforted her. She hadn't realized how lonely the nights had become until that moment. By morning, he had fixed the fence and repaired her water pump. She told him he didn't have to stay, but he only said, "Give me 30 nights, ma'am. Then I'll ride on." She frowned, confused. "Why 30? He met her gaze, his face unreadable. Because that's how long it takes a man to decide if he's meant to stay or keep running. She didn't understand what he meant, but something inside her whispered yes. Maybe it was the way he looked at the horizon, like a man who'd lost everything and was afraid to hope again. Days passed into a rhythm of dust and sweat. They worked side by side, the air between them heavy with words unspoken. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with hunger but with something far more dangerous, tenderness. And in those moments, Evelyn Hart, who had buried her heart beside her husband's grave, felt something stir deep within her, something she had sworn she would never feel again. One evening, a storm gathered over the mountains, lightning flashing like silver knives across the sky. The wind howled through the valley and the rain came hard, beating against the roof. Evelyn rushed to the barn to check the horses and found him there, shirt soaked, hair plastered to his brow. He turned, startled to see her. "Barn's leaking again," he said, shouting over the storm. "I was trying to patch it." She took a step closer, rain dripping from her lashes. "You'll catch your death out here." He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be the worst thing." Something broke in her then. A wall she hadn't known was still standing. "You don't talk like a man who wants to live." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Some men live too long with ghosts, ma'am. Makes the days heavy." She reached out, her hand trembling. The storm thundered above them, and for a moment they simply stood there, two broken souls bound by silence. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to the house, her heart beating like the rain. But that night, lying awake, she knew the truth. The stranger who'd come under the red moon had already changed everything. And though 30 nights might pass like grains of sand, she sensed that his shadow would never truly leave her land, or her heart. The second morning dawned cool and gold, the kind of desert dawn that fools a person into thinking the day won't scorch them alive by noon. Evelyn found Cole already working the fence line, shirt sleeves rolled up, hat low against the light. He moved with quiet purpose, every motion efficient and deliberate, as though labor itself was his way of staying sane. He had kept his word. He'd said 30 nights, and now she began to wonder what each of those nights would bring, and what they would cost her heart. That morning, over black coffee and half-burned biscuits, he told her about the arrangement, plain and steady, like a man laying down cards. "I'll stay 30 nights, Miss Hart, work for my keep. Fix what needs fixing. Then I ride south come morning of the 31st. She nodded, trying not to show her disappointment. "You count your life in days, Mr. Laramie?" He gave a small, crooked grin. "No, ma'am. I count it in debts and miles. 30 days is just a number I can live with." There was something final in his tone, not arrogance, but resignation. A man already half gone. The next weeks unfolded like chapters in a slow, sun-baked rhythm. He mended fences, broke wild horses, hauled timber down from the ridge, and she began to see that beneath the silence, he carried discipline, the kind that came from years of surviving hard country and harder men. He rarely spoke of himself. When she asked where he came from, he only said, "Far enough that the dust don't care my name anymore." Still, there were moments, brief, flickering ones, when the mask slipped. Once she caught him at dusk, standing by the graves under the willow where her husband rested. He didn't touch the cross, only tipped his hat, murmuring something in Apache that she couldn't understand. Later that night, when she asked what he said, he answered simply, "A prayer for the dead to rest easy." It was the first time she realized his voice could be soft. On the 8th night, the air turned heavy with thunder. The desert was alive, lightning crawling over the horizon, the scent of rain thick as smoke. Evelyn stood by the window watching him in the barn, the glow of his lantern cutting through the storm. When the wind slammed the shutters open, she startled, heart racing. She hadn't meant to, but her feet carried her to the barn before reason could stop her. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of hay and rain. Cole turned as she entered, his eyes catching the lamplight. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly. She hesitated. "Neither should you." He gave a small laugh, though his expression stayed serious. "Can't leave the horses to fret. They spook easy in thunder." Evelyn nodded, stepping closer, her hands trembling, though she couldn't say why. The rain outside grew heavier, a wild drumming on the roof. "Cole," she whispered suddenly, his name tasting strange and intimate on her tongue. He turned to her fully now. There was a softness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, a gentleness that could break her if she let it. "I don't know why you came here," she said, her voice shaking. "But I think maybe I needed you to." He took a slow step toward her. "You don't need a man like me, Evelyn." She swallowed hard. "Maybe I don't need a man at all. But I haven't felt alive in years, and now—" Her breath caught. "Now I can't stop thinking about you." The storm roared above them, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then, almost in a whisper, she said the words that had burned her lips since the night he arrived. "Be gentle," she pleaded, her voice trembling like the rain. "Touch me slowly." Cole froze. His eyes darkened, not with lust, but with fear. "Don't ask that of me, Evie," he said, the first time he dared shorten her name. "I'm not the kind who takes what's fragile and leaves it whole." She stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath, her heart hammering. "Then prove me wrong." For a heartbeat, he stood still, torn between restraint and desire. Then he reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, his fingers trembling like he'd forgotten how to touch something human. "In 30 nights, he murmured, his voice breaking low, "you'll belong only to me." It wasn't a claim. It wasn't even a promise. It was something deeper, a warning maybe. But to Evelyn, it sounded like salvation. That night changed everything between them. In the days that followed, their work went on much the same, feeding, mending, branding, yet something unseen pulsed beneath every glance, every word. They moved around each other like planets locked in orbit, drawn and bound by forces neither could name. Cole avoided her eyes when he could. He worked longer hours, rode farther into the hills, and came back at dusk with dust in his hair and sorrow in his gaze. She knew he was fighting something, but she didn't press him. Some men's battles were fought in silence, and she had learned long ago not to drag ghosts into the daylight. Still, one evening she found him sitting by the fire, sharpening his knife, the light glinting off the steel. He looked up as she entered. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She blinked. "Leaving?" "This land, this ranch. Start somewhere new, somewhere that doesn't carry his shadow." Evelyn's chest tightened. "Matthew's shadow will follow me wherever I go. He's buried in my heart as much as in that ground." Cole nodded slowly. "Then maybe you just need someone to help you carry it." She looked at him across the firelight, this quiet stranger with the haunted eyes and hands scarred from 100 unseen wars. And for the first time, she let herself imagine what 30 nights could mean, not 30 nights of work or silence, but of healing, of learning how to touch again without breaking. As the days passed, she began marking each one in her ledger, not as debts or wages, but as something more intimate. "Night 10. He smiled for the first time. "Night 14. He hummed a tune by the fire, soft and low. "Night 18. She laughed again. By the 20th night, the laughter came easier. The walls she'd built around her heart began to crumble. Yet under it all, she felt the ticking of time like a heartbeat. 30 nights, he'd said. When the last one came, he would leave. One evening, as they sat beneath the stars, she couldn't bear it any longer. "What happens after the 30th night, Cole?" He was quiet for a long time. "I stopped pretending I deserve peace, is that all?" He met her eyes then, his gaze steady and raw. "No, I'll carry you with me, same as every sin I've got." Her throat tightened. "And what if I don't want you to go?" He looked away, jaw clenched. "Then you'd best not let me stay." That night she lay awake listening to the wind through the cracks in the walls, the soft rustle of the desert outside. She thought of his promise, one or his curse. "In 30 nights you'll belong only to me." She didn't know what belonging meant anymore. Not after loss, not after grief. But something inside her ached for it. Not to be possessed, but to be seen, to be touched as if she mattered again. And so, as the desert stars burned over the valley, Evelyn Hart made her own silent vow. If she only had 30 nights with Cole Laramie, she would make every one of them count. She would love him, fearlessly, as the desert loves the rain, knowing it never stays long but always leaves the earth changed forever. The days grew hotter as summer bled across the valley. The air shimmered above the earth, and the scent of dust, horses, and mesquite filled every breath. Evelyn and Cole worked side by side beneath the white sky, speaking little, though words were hardly needed anymore. The silences between them were no longer sharp. They were heavy, full of understanding, full of something that both soothed and scared them. It was in the small things that their closeness deepened. The way he steadied her shoulder when she mounted a restless colt. The way her hand brushed his when they passed tools. The shared smiles when the sun went down and the work was done. Their rhythm grew natural, inevitable. Two people drawn by something as vast and ungovernable as the land itself. Yet beneath that peace, fear smoldered. Evelyn could feel it whenever she looked at him, in the way his gaze drifted often toward the horizon as though expecting trouble to rise from the mountains. There were nights when he woke sweating, muttering words in Apache under his breath. He'd stand outside afterward staring at the stars, jaw tight, eyes far away. She didn't ask what haunted him. Some men carried ghosts that only the desert could understand. But she began to dream of him, of his hands, his voice, the promise that lingered between them like lightning waiting to strike. In 30 nights you'll belong only to me. The memory of those words burned through her days, and each time she saw him, shirt open at the throat, skin tanned and marked by the sun, the ache inside, her grew harder to ignore. It was near the 20th night when it happened, the first touch that broke the world open. They had ridden out to gather the cattle that had strayed north toward the ridge. A storm had passed earlier that morning, leaving the air sharp and clean, the scent of rain still clinging to the earth. Evelyn's mare stumbled on a slick patch of clay, and before she could right herself, she was falling. Cole was off his horse in a flash. Catching her before she hit the ground, she landed hard against his chest. The breath knocked out of her. For a long moment, they didn't move. His arms around her were strong, steady, trembling, just slightly. The sound of his heartbeat filled her ears, quick, powerful, alive. She looked up, her face inches from his, and saw something break behind his eyes. Desire, yes, but also something deeper, sorrow, longing, and the desperate need to be forgiven for things unsaid. Evelyn, he whispered, her name rough in his mouth. Cole, she breathed, and that was all it took. His lips met hers with a hunger that frightened her, yet he was gentle, unbearably so, as though she might vanish if he pressed too hard. The world disappeared, the heat, the wind, the sun, until there was only the taste of him, the sound of their hearts, the quiet promise between them that neither dared speak aloud. When they pulled apart, she was shaking. His hand brushed her cheek, thumb tracing her jaw like a prayer. I told you, he murmured, voice low. 30 nights. And after? She asked. He didn't answer. His eyes said everything, that he didn't believe in afters not for men like him. But peace in the frontier never lasted. News came with the next supply wagon. Whispers from town of raiders riding north again. Same band that had terrorized the valley 2 years back. Men who'd killed for cattle, money, and worse. Evelyn froze when she heard their leader's name, Jeb Doolin. It was Doolin's gang that had murdered her husband and burned out 3 neighboring ranches before vanishing south across the border. When she told Cole, his face went still, carved in stone. I know that name, he said. They used to run with a man called Briggs. Evelyn's blood ran cold. You know them? Used to, he said quietly. A long time ago, before I learned what kind of men they were. He didn't say more, but she could see the truth in his eyes. He'd ridden with them once. Maybe not by choice, maybe out of survival, but the shame sat heavy on him. That night, the air was thick and restless, the kind that carried bad omens. Cole sat on the porch cleaning his rifle while Evelyn stood by the doorway, arms crossed, heart thudding. They'll come here, he said finally. Doolin knows this ranch. Knew your husband. He won't pass up another chance to finish what he started. Then we fight, she said. He looked up sharply. You. She straightened her shoulders. This land's all I've got, Cole. I buried my husband here. I'm not running from devils twice. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Proud, sad, full of respect. You've got more grit than most men I've known. She met his gaze, unflinching. And you've got something worth fighting for. Don't throw it away. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened, and she knew then that he'd die before letting anything happen to her. The next days were tense and wordless. They repaired fences, loaded ammunition, and kept the horses close. Cole taught her how to shoot from cover, how to reload quick, how to breathe steady under fire. His patience never faltered, and she found herself learning fast, not out of fear, but out of the will to protect what had finally begun to feel like home again. But the danger wasn't just outside the ranch. It was inside their hearts. Every night when the chores were done and the lamps were low, they found themselves drawn together, unable to stay apart. Their love burned like the desert sun, fierce, dangerous, necessary. He touched her as though she were both salvation and sin, and she met his hunger with equal fire. Every moment a defiance of the pain they'd both carried for too long. Still, even in passion, there was fear not of each other but of time. The nights were slipping away. The 30th was drawing near, and with it the promise that he'd leave. One night, gunfire echoed far in the hills. Both of them shot up from bed, hearts pounding. Cole grabbed his rifle, scanning the dark horizon. "They're testing distance," he said. "Won't be long now." Evelyn's breath shook. "Then promise me one thing." He turned to her, moonlight glinting on the steel of his weapon. "If you die," she said, voice breaking, "don't let it be for revenge. Don't let them take that part of you again." He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "If I die, Evie," he whispered, "it'll be for you. And that's the only death I can live with." Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't look away. "And if you live?" He smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'll learn how." She leaned into him, her lips trembling against his. "If you ride away now," she whispered, "you'll take my heart with you." His voice was a rasp of sand and longing. "When the 30th night ends," he said, "I'll have given you mine." Outside, the wind howled through the valley like the breath of ghosts. The desert was waiting, as it always did, patient, endless, watching. But within the walls of that small ranch, love had taken root, fierce as the thorned cactus that blooms in the hottest months. It was a love born of pain, tested by fire and marked by the promise that nothing, not even the coming storm, could ever erase. And though Evelyn didn't yet know it, those nights of fire and fear would be the ones that defined them both. The nights when love became the only thing left worth fighting for. The dawn before the attack came quiet, too quiet. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. The sky stretched pale and bruised over the ridges, and the faintest smear of dust moved on the far horizon like a warning drawn across the earth. Cole stood by the corral, rifle slung over his shoulder, his shirt undone at the throat. His horse shifted restlessly, nostrils flaring. He could feel it in the air, the way animals always could, that something bad was coming. Evelyn came up behind him, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked. He didn't turn. "By sundown, maybe sooner." She stepped closer, eyes on the same distant line of dust. "You could ride out now, Cole. Get clear before they reach us. I wouldn't blame you." He looked at her then, his eyes calm, dark, and unshakable. "And leave you here alone?" "I've been alone before," he smiled faintly. "Not anymore." She wanted to argue, to tell him that she couldn't bear to lose another man to violence, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she reached out and touched his arm. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, alive. "Then we fight together," she said. Cole nodded once, firm. Together. They spent the morning preparing. He showed her how to line up sight and barrel, how to load fast, how to keep calm when her hands began to shake. She was a quick learner. Her fear hardened into focus, her breath steady, her movements sharp. When the sun reached its peak, the dust cloud drew closer. 20, maybe 30 riders. The same markings on their coats, the same cruel laughter carried on the wind. Doolin's gang. Cole felt an old wound twist inside him.
He had once ridden among them, young, foolish, desperate for belonging.
But Doolin had been more beast than man, and Cole had seen the truth too late. The blood he'd spilled in those years still clung to him like dust that would never wash away. Now fate had turned full circle, bringing the past back to his doorstep. Evelyn stood by the window of the house, her rifle ready. Cole took position behind the stone trough near the barn. He counted the riders as they fanned out. Their leader rode in front, Doolin himself, a broad man with a red beard and eyes pale as frostbite. "Well, I'll be damned," Doolin called out, his grin wide and wicked. "Ain't that Cole Laramie I see down there?" "Thought you were dead, boy." Cole's voice carried steady over the yard. "You'll wish I was before the day's done." Doolin laughed, spitting into the dirt. "You always were too noble for your own good. Guess I'll just finish what I started with the Heart Woman while I'm here." The words hit like a slap. Evelyn stiffened, rage burning through her fear. Cole raised his rifle. "Try it," he said quietly. Then he fired. The bullet caught Doolin's hat clean off his head. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the stillness. Horses screamed. The air filled with smoke, dust, and the sharp stench of gunpowder. Evelyn crouched behind the window frame, firing methodically, reloading as Cole had taught her. She saw one man fall, then another. The ranch echoed with the sound of war, but beneath the noise she felt a strange calm. She wasn't a widow tonight. She wasn't broken. She was fighting for her life, for the man who had come to her under a red moon and taught her how to live again. Cole moved like a shadow through the yard, quick and precise. He fired, ducked, rolled. His world narrowed to instinct and purpose. Bullets tore through the fence posts, shattered glass, ripped holes through the feed sacks. One grazed his arm, another struck the ground inches from his boot, but he kept going. Then he saw Doolin near the barn, shotgun raised. Cole shouted, firing, but too late. The shot boomed and pain exploded through his side. He stumbled, dropped to one knee, breath gone. "Cole!" Evelyn screamed from the house. Doolin laughed, advancing. "Always knew you'd die slow, boy." Cole gritted his teeth, forcing himself up. "Not before you." Evelyn stepped out of the house, rifle leveled, her voice steady as stone. "Drop it, Doolin," he turned, sneering. "You again, sweetheart? You should have stayed buried with your husband." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "This is for him." The shot hit true. Doolin staggered back, eyes wide, then fell hard into the dust. The world went still again. For a moment, only the crackle of the burning barn and the moans of wounded men broke the silence. The survivors scattered, riding hard for the horizon. The battle was over. Evelyn ran to Cole, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and spreading fast. No, stay with me," she whispered, pressing her hands to the wound. He winced, but managed a faint smile. "Told you. 30 nights. Don't you dare," she snapped, her voice breaking. "You're not dying here." "Not like this," he laughed weakly. "Bossy woman." "Quiet," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. "Save your strength." Together she half-dragged, half-carried him into the house. His breath came shallow, every exhale a struggle. She tore strips of linen, pressed them against the wound. Whispered prayers she hadn't said in years. Hours passed before his breathing steadied, his pulse faint but sure. When night fell, the fires were out, the dead buried. The stars burned bright over the wounded ranch, and Evelyn sat by his bedside, exhaustion etched deep into her bones. He stirred, his voice hoarse. "How many days left?" She smiled through her tears. One more night." He reached for her hand, fingers rough and warm despite his weakness. "Then I guess I'll keep my promise." "Which one?" she asked softly. "The one where you belong to me." She laughed then, the sound raw and full of love. "You fool. You've belonged to me since the first night." He closed his eyes, a small, peaceful smile on his lips. "Then I reckon that's fair." By morning, the sheriff rode in with a posse drawn by the smoke. They found the ranch still standing, though battered and scorched, the air heavy with the scent of ash and blood. Cole lay in bed, pale but alive. The sheriff, a hard man with years of desert law etched into his face, looked down at him and nodded. "You bought yourself a place here, Laramie. Half-breed or not, you earned it." Cole only smiled faintly. "Didn't do it for a place." The sheriff glanced at Evelyn, then back to him, and something like understanding flickered in his eyes. "Then you did it for the right reason." He left them there, the rising sun spilling gold across the broken land. Evelyn sat beside Cole, brushing hair from his brow. "Rest," she whispered. "You're home now." He opened his eyes, voice a whisper. "A deal's a deal, Evie. 30 nights and you belong to me." She kissed his forehead, tears falling into his hair. "And you to me," she said. "Always." Outside, the wind swept through the valley, carrying away the ashes of the fight. The desert, cruel and beautiful, held its silence once more. That evening, as the light bled from the sky, Evelyn walked the edge of the pasture, the air warm with the scent of rain and gunpowder. The land had cost her so much, her husband, her peace, her innocence. But it had also given her something she hadn't believed possible again. Hope. Behind her, through the open window of the small ranch house, she could hear Cole's breathing, steady now, alive. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe the desert had finally taken enough from her. Tomorrow would be the 30th night. The end of the promise, or maybe the beginning of another. The sun rose slow and tender that morning, the way it sometimes does after a long night of pain. The land was hushed under a veil of mist, the hills bathed in rose and amber light. It was the 30th day since Cole had come to Evelyn's door, 30 nights of danger, healing. and something far stronger than either of them had ever expected. Inside the small ranch house, Cole stirred awake. The wound on his side was nearly healed, though a sharp breath still made him wince. Evelyn had tended him every hour, keeping vigil through the long nights. She was there now, standing by the window, her hair loose, sunlight spilling through it like gold through smoke. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You keep staring at that horizon like it's gonna tell you a secret." She turned, smiling softly. "Maybe it will. Maybe it already has." He chuckled, his voice still rough. "You always talk in riddles in the morning. Only when I've been awake all night thinking." "Thinking about what?" She hesitated. "About what happens now. The fight's over. The land's ours again." But me?" he asked, sitting up slowly, careful not to tear his stitches. "You were never meant to stay, Cole. You belong to the wind, to the road. You said so yourself." He studied her quietly, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "I said a lot of things before I met you." Her eyes softened. "And now?" He swung his legs off the bed, standing with effort. "Now I'm thinking the road can wait a while." Evelyn crossed the room, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "A while?" He took her hand, pressing it against his heart. "Maybe forever, if you'll have me." They stepped outside together, the air crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and sage. The ranch bore its scars, the burnt barn, the broken fence, the bullet holes, but there was beauty in the ruin. It was alive again. Cole limped toward the corral where the horses grazed under the morning light. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head. "This land's all I have left. My husband and I built it together. I thought when he died, the heart of it died too. But I was wrong. It just needed time." He smiled faintly. "And someone stubborn enough to keep fighting for it." She laughed, a soft, broken sound. "I reckon that's both of us." He leaned against the fence, watching her with a quiet reverence. There was something about her strength that humbled him. The way she had faced down fear, the way she had chosen to live again when she could have let grief consume her. "Evelyn," he said finally, "I never told you what those 30 nights really meant." She looked up at him, curious. "You said it was a promise." He nodded. "It was more than that. Where I come from, when a man gives his word for 30 nights, it's not just time, it's transformation. 30 nights to break an old life and build a new one." Her breath caught. "You mean?" "I meant to leave when the 30 days were done," he said quietly. "To make sure you were safe, then ride on. But somewhere along the way, I stopped counting down." Evelyn's eyes filled with something fierce and tender all at once. "And what if I told you I was counting up instead?" He smiled, slow and genuine. "Then I'd say the count ends tonight." That evening, the world turned gold. The storm that had threatened for days finally broke, but it came not with fury, with grace. Light rain drifted down, soft and cool, carrying the scent of new life. Evelyn lit the lanterns, their glow warm against the gathering dark. Cole sat by the fire, the flames flickering across his face. His shirt hung open, a scar running like a river down his ribs. Evelyn came to him carrying a small tin cup of whiskey. "Doctor's orders," she teased. He took it, sipping, his eyes never leaving hers. "You make a good nurse," she smiled faintly. "You make a stubborn patient." For a moment, they simply looked at one another, the silence between them richer than any words. The fire popped. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. "Evelyn," he said at last, his voice low, steady. "You remember what you said that first night?" Her breath hitched. "I remember. You said, 'Be gentle, touch me slowly.'" She nodded, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "And you said," I said, "in 30 nights you'll belong only to me." He set the cup down and stood, crossing the space between them. "Well," he murmured, 30 nights are done." She looked up at him, trembling not with fear but with the weight of everything they had lived through. "Then maybe it's time I stop fighting what's already true." Cole reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her neck. The touch was soft, reverent, almost prayerful. Outside, the rain deepened, a steady rhythm on the roof. When he kissed her, it wasn't the fire of a desperate man or the hunger of one who'd been denied too long. It was something deeper, a promise made flesh, the kind of kiss that spoke of roots sinking into dry earth, of two souls that had found home in each other after lifetimes of wandering. She pressed closer, her hands gripping the back of his shirt, feeling the strength beneath the scars. He moved slow, exactly as she'd once begged him to, Gentle, patient, certain. The world outside ceased to matter. The storm, the past, the ghosts, they all faded into the rhythm of breath and heartbeat and quiet surrender. Later, as the rain softened into mist, they lay together in the hush of the dying fire. Cole's hand rested over hers, fingers entwined. You know, Evelyn whispered, I used to think love was something that happened once, something that ended when death came. He turned his head, looking at her. And now I think maybe love's the only thing that doesn't die. It just waits until you're ready again. He smiled, eyes half closed. Then I reckon we kept it waiting long enough. She laughed softly. Maybe we did. The night stretched on, calm and full. The rain had washed the world clean. Tomorrow they would rebuild. The barn, the fences, the lives they had nearly lost. But tonight was for peace, for healing, for the quiet triumph of two broken hearts that had learned how to beat again. At dawn, the sun broke through the clouds, turning the wet earth to gold. Cole stood by the window, shirt half-buttoned, his hat low over his eyes. Evelyn joined him, slipping her hand into his. You leaving? She asked gently. He squeezed her fingers. No, I'm staying. There's fences to mend, stock to raise, and a woman who needs me as much as I need her. Evelyn's smile was soft, full of morning light. Then I guess this is home. He nodded, kissing her forehead. Home, he said. As the day began, they stepped out into the open, side by side. The valley stretched before them, scarred, yes, but alive. The kind of place where a man could build a life, and a woman could believe again. The 30 nights were over, but what they'd built in that time would outlast them both. And somewhere deep in the wind that rolled through the desert grass, it seemed the earth itself whispered their story. Be gentle, touch me slowly, and never let go.